Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening for some of you. So today we have a beginning of our executive cyber simulation program, which will be presented by JS Gervais. He's an expert in the cybersecurity protection for the companies with a big experience and working in different geographies. And he specialized as well on the cyber protection, preparation, simulations, and he has some solutions as well. And I would like today we are having a GCBR joint program with Bridge Commander. And I'm really happy to see all of you. And I pass floor to JS to present the program. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marina, for this warm welcome. So if you allow me, I will share my screen and the complete presentation. Coming up. All right. So now you should see a full screen intro slide. This is the toughest part.
So it's not still not coming. So we still have us on the screen. Yes, now it's
Good now? Perfect. This was the toughest part with technology. So good morning. We have a super packed program full of information. So I'll try and go as fast but as smooth as possible. So since we have so much content, way more than for the 90 minutes, I will welcome any interruption for questions and discussions should you want, need, or feel that we need to address more in depth of the topics. So basically today, session one of a three sessions, we're going to focus on the fundamentals, tales from the trenches, and stories. And again, as we said in the introductions and the social media hype, we'll try to make it very raw. Raw being you're going to hear stuff that I wish you haven't heard anywhere else in terms of honesty, trust, and directness of the content. The three sessions will get you through the very proactive, the why we hear, and then through next session, a tabletop exercise that we call the impossible decision workshop. Impossible is a big word here, but we're going to try to make it tough on the intellect, not tough on you, of course, and with the help of the breach commander as a support should you guys feel like it. And then session three will be all about the debrief and the after. Should be very interesting. Also a mix of, again, tales, stories, and how do we address all that we went through virtually and reflecting on your own experiences together. GCBR is why we're here and the big sponsor behind this. So thank you for making all this happen. GCBR is a not-for-profit organization putting a lot of effort in the community. So thank you very much for making this world a better place with all the people in here. Myself, very, very briefly, you've seen my face and you're going to see it all through this presentation. Despite a peach skin, it's been more than 25 years I'm doing this. So my experience is across military, corporate sector, and basically doing what I did best, at least good, across all those years. The proactive through the reactive side of the house in terms of crisis management, incident response. At some point in time, very technical. In my work, I'm still very technical, but I figured out, as we're going to see in the conversation, that addressing the human aspects and the business, the corporate stuff behind all this mattered more to me than being on the floor. Very quickly, why we here? Well, because you guys are seniors, you guys are leaders, you guys are people we trust in the organizations to step up when it's needed in terms of management, in terms of crisis, in terms of leadership. Lots of great statistics here. Statistics speak in various directions, depending on who you ask, depending on where you look. But basically, the global picture is impressively negative. I'll be light on the scare factors because we all know that the statistics are mainly bad. Some are improving. I mean, the spending of companies for protection, the awareness, the resilience aspects, the conversation, the leadership is really progressing. But what we see in the reports from the industry, especially from vendors, uh, of course, some people have something to sell out of this, but it goes into the direction where cybercrime, criminality, data breaches, hacking, cyber crisis are just they're here, they're there to stay, and unfortunately, they're progressing in depth, in speed, in size, and in volume. So you guys are the ones we would rely to for addressing all this in your organizations at a level which is a lot of the times far from technical, and it's damn about time that we address those topics away from the keyboard. With all the respect from the keyboard people, I'm one of them. So we're going to be looking at this and trying to answer the question: are we confident that we can do the right thing in the first minutes when the crisis hits, and then across the next hours, the next days, and those 72 hours that are so critical in terms of response? Cost of cyber incidents, the impacts are across the whole organization. It's not just an IT problem. Back in the days, and most of the time, when we look at cybersecurity departments, they address cyber crises as something that's played from the keyboard. Less and less with maturity and people like yourselves, but still too much nowadays. So we all know what it impacts, right? It's about trust, it's about chaos, it's about compliance failure in some aspect. The regulations are getting stricter and stricter, and the insurance market and the insurance obligations into the mix is adding complexity that is beyond what we had in the last five, 10, or even 20 years. So no surprise to people like you, but we're going to keep that in mind. Those breaches, those cyber hacks, they happen. Why do they happen? Well, Verizon, it's one of those reports. Again, we take it with a grain of salt, but Verizon as a company publishes an annual report that they call their DBIR, Data Breach Investigation Report. It's an annual, and the latest one has been published this year for 2026. And amongst this huge report that goes across markets, segments, verticals, and industries, those cards felt very relevant to present to you because it gives a perspective on the persona that's behind all those hacks. And mainly, they have found that the face of the threat is mostly external. It's mostly crime-based. They target end users and not system admins for the most part. Even the system administrators and VIPs and developers are targeted. But for general access, they target the general population and they get their way. And the motive, no surprise to all of you, is mostly financial. They make money off of it. So it's very simple. Of course, not every hack is the same. Espionage, so spying, is still a real thing, but we'll address espionage as another category as we'll see in the next slide, because when you face this level of sophistication, if you have a nation state or very sophisticated threat actor or attacker facing you, it's another ball game. So we're gonna go there if we have to, but we're gonna keep the global cybercrime as the motive and the general defense approach in our discourse. Privacy regulations, GDPR, DORA, HIPAA, CMMC in the US. I'm showing a big mix of all of this, but everything that is a regulation about what we should do or penalties if we didn't do what we should have done, it's starting to hit the financial baselines of a lot of companies. As a citizen, as a corporate citizen, and as a personal citizen, I wish for this. I'm very happy of all of this. But unfortunately, for those companies impacted, it can hurt the financial bottom lines. Again, the statistics are starting to come. I think it's a good approach. Penalizing those who fail. It's a bit harsh in some aspects, but in terms of regulating, I mean, it's a very good mean to whip with the stick and get people to move in the right direction. I think again, a double-edged sword. It's not an easy discourse, of course. Should you guys have anything to agree or disagree or want to jump in at this point with questions or affirmations or saying something before we move on? It's very intimate, so please feel free if you have something to say.
Oh, I just, I was looking on the previous slide and the penalties which this money lost, it's impressive, like 1.2 billion just for paying for a GDPR. The question, who is the final receiver of this money? It's the states who finally take this and how they, I don't know, like use it. Or, how do you know how this working in the real world?
That's a very good question. Personally, I never saw what that money went because I never worked for the European Union or one of those regulators. Worked with and for Big Fours back in the days, but never saw the money transfer. So if anybody has more information, that would be great. You would expect that these amounts end up in annual budgets and maybe not as projections, but at least after the fact as a retrospective income for the countries and states, but I don't have the information.
Yeah. Annalie, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question about your statistics
Please.
because I read a report from generated by Lloyd's Insurance of London yesterday about scammers who perpetrate victims. 68% of financial scams originate on Meta, Facebook, WhatsApp, or Instagram. And that's Meta, generates 18% of their annual revenue from hosting and supporting these scammers on their platforms because the scammers pay to be there. So you could actually say that Meta Corporation is complicit. But I was curious if your data includes personal scams.
Yeah, the data is general in terms of this is GDPR and privacy related. So when it's about privacy, it's either an individual that got stolen or a corporation that lost privacy slash personal data of a person. You can see HR records or anything that would impact the privacy. And biometrics were part of that at some point. So we compiled stats as a global view of all of this. And yes, assuming that it includes all of this in terms of fines, because they were reported as being those are penalties that were imposed on those organizations. I don't want to move too fast and skip slides, but we have a good segue into what you're asking here, and we can continue the discussion about this. Personal data is targeted by cybercrime. Okay, I'm going faster. Okay, we're going to go back on the previous slides, but in terms of what they're after, corporate secrets, yes, of course. General data to resell or blackmail, yes, is there. But that very good visual on the right that's been produced by somebody outside of us, it's privacy by design. It's still online. It shows all the different aspects of a person's life that could have value, resell value, either for marketing or criminal activities. And I'm not making those two equals, but it's very interesting how much they overlap in terms of intent. So all the tracking that we have and feel on our apps on our phones and on computers, when we give permissions to some software to access the microphone, the GPS, the health data, the proximity things, the steps we took, the VO2 max that that our body has, and on top of everything else in our profiles, it adds up to something that has great value for them for many aspects. No surprise to you all, but when we see such a summary of all of that, and we realize that in most of our software computings and digital profiles, if one profile doesn't combine all of this, there's just one step to take to figure out that, okay, if we take a couple of our profiles and our devices, combine all of this about us, which it keeps me up at night, quite frankly.
Hey, JS.
Yes, please. Yes,
When you
Dawn.
go, when you go, hi there. When you go back to the other slide and you look at the cumulative effect of the various fines, particularly for a global company. Are there any stats on just how long it takes a company and the amount of sort of human capital that goes into resolving that? I'm looking at this time factor, and it strikes me that there was an entity that a rather large one that has a super app and a super, ecosystem, if you will. And they actually started out with a presence in the UAE, and then that entity was acquired. And there were two breaches, one in 2014 and one in 2016. And the original entity did not report, and was in terms of disclosures, it was well over a year. And I'm still reading about the impact, right? And we're talking about, here we are nearly 10, 11 years later. And the impact has been passed along from the entity that was acquired to the global company. It just strikes me that, is that atypical, or is that typical to have this longer tail, long drawn out ordeal, if you will, that stretches across time?
Super good question. Again, I don't want to speak alone in here, but if anybody else has something to interject, please feel free. But I'm turning my tongue several times here, but it's 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 about reputation and knowing that you did bad if you did, or at least that the consequences are bad. Let's say you got breached and you figured it out, and your technical people knows about it, and the forensics firm that you brought in knows about it, and then sooner or later you're gonna have to speak about your security posture to your auditors, internal or external. You're gonna have to speak to your regulators. You're going to have to renew insurance contracts. What do you do when you know that you failed in some aspects, and that even if you're guilty or negligent or not, because sometimes you're not negligent and you could get breached anyway. So it's not about blaming the victims. There's different level of victims, but will they speak up when they know that it could hurt, that it could make them fail at other processes, especially insurances? I'm not an insurance expert. Some of you on the call may be, but I've seen enough insurance dynamics in the past 10 to 15 years to know that insurability and reinsurability is not guaranteed. Back in the days, and I don't want to digress too much from your question, Don, but back in the days, insurance questionnaires were asking about, yeah, do you have data? Yes, of course I do. How much? Well, perhaps that much, a couple of gigabytes, terabytes, maybe. And then you have firewalls. Yes. Oh, yes. You have antivirus? Yes, we have. Very declarative, very broad as questions. Yes, I have firewalls, but I've seen a company that declared that they had firewalls in their insurance papers. Those firewalls as protection mechanisms on the network, the gatekeeper for packets to go in and out of the network. The firewalls were in a box in the warehouse. They didn't lie. They had firewalls. Yeah, they were not plugged in, they were not configured, they were not in operations, but they had. Fast forward 15 years from that event, which I went through personally. The questionnaires are getting way more serious, way more fine and granular on the questions they ask. And the brokers and the insurers at the other end, they'll come back with questions if you don't satisfy what they ask for, because those questions have an intent, right? It's not about yes or no and trying to avoid with a very close question. It's about assessing risk, because those insurers are betting on you. So don't want to make it an insurance topic, but it's very close to my heart. Should we disclose when we had something, or is it possible to brush it under the rug? I'm not saying it's a good thing to do, but that's a very human reaction facing a guilt a guilt aspect in your cyber. So at some point, and I'm not saying it's good, and at some point some companies may have to ask themselves, what's the business decision and what's the rationale behind this? And can we get away from this? I don't like saying it, but I can see business people in closed rooms asking themselves the questions, well, if nobody saw it, and maybe we could get away with it for all those reasons, because of all the pressures and all the negativity that could come with this. I'll stop at that and let you feedback. I think disclosure is better and is always better. I'm not saying it because I'm forced to do it or because the law asks for it, but I think the fallouts of disclosures, and we've seen companies go out into the open after breaches, after failures, after getting hit for different reasons, and sometimes they were not that culprit; they were really victims, and coming clean and coming out and making a big deal of their communication even before people ask questions. And in the community, LastPass did it amongst some that are top of my head. And what I see in the general community, again, very personal perspective, is a very positive view of all of this, saying, okay, you came clean, not good, you did this, please don't do it again. But wow, congratulations for all the information you gave us, because if you hadn't spoken, would we have known? And I think that would be the way to go, but it needs to be done properly, right? Proper PR, proper legal approach, disclosing correctly so that you're trying to do things right, but there's always entities out there that are going to try to use your information against yourself. I guess it's part of the public game, right? I'll put a dot at there and let you feedback. Maybe I went too far from what you originally intended on.
No, that's helpful. I was trying to get a sense for sort of the breadth of time and the impact, right, on the people, like if that's even been sized, because it feels like we have, I don't know, the better part of 24% in fines collectively in this little paragraph here. And it feels like there's a trail even behind that, that there are
It
financial
does.
implications as well.
It
Thank you.
does. And even when companies, do they know? And because again, the statistics vary on dwell time. I didn't want to go into too much technical context, but the dwell time, the time during which an intruder, an attacker is in your network between their intrusion and the moment you find that they're there and start to contain that moment where they're just you're sick, you're breached, and you don't know it. That dwell time varies depending on who you ask, but it's not hours, it's not days, it's weeks and months. It's crazy. So a lot of the intrusions, give or take, takes so long to figure out, if ever, that it's very tough on companies to report something that's timely accurate, saying, okay, we lost data, and we can even tell which year it was. It should not digress and diverge from disclosing, meaning I cannot tell what I lost, and I cannot tell when was it. So how good disclosing it. I think we have to disclose it anyways, but you can see that it gives you a very tough time, because lots of the incidents, like a breach and disclosure for regulators, is one thing. And as we're going to see in the kill chain and in the other concepts that are coming, when we react to a big incident that was subtle, that was done by somebody that was careful to cover their tracks and trying to not be discovered, we're going back years in some aspects. Please go ahead. Okay, I thought somebody spoke. So speak up if you need to. So the point is, when we go back into forensics and investigations, the more we scratch, the more we dig, the more we find, and sometimes, unfortunately, a lot of times it goes back years. It's not infrequent that it goes back years. So that's kind of a tough spot. Moving on in the essence of time. Okay, I'm going to try to go fast. It's already a third of the time that went through. I'm not trying to stress ourselves. What made it tough also on the defenders and the implementers, people trying to make things work. There's a convergence of a lot of aspects, and one of them is the networking or the networked factor of our technologies, where in some years ago, machines were isolated, and nowadays your fridge, your dishwasher, your TV, and in the corporate and in the industries, all those machines that used to be standalone electrical, if not just mechanical, nowadays they're connected for good or worse. Okay, there's a lot of advantages to connectivity and remote maintenance and remote interactions and monitoring, but it comes with a downside, where what we call the industrial internet of things, IIoT. So IT is information technology, OT is operational technology, and they're very different in essence from where they come for multiple reasons. OT used to be more machines, and nowadays they're starting to be computers with mechanical parts more and more. And the way to address those are very different. But as the convergence happens, technical people and decision makers have to deal with, how do we secure a machine that needs technical patches? There's a vulnerability, and we need to patch some kind of service on the machine from the vendor. It's not as easy as enabling Apple updates or Windows updates on your machine, and it does overnight and blah, 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 and everything is good. Now, for machines and specifically OT, even if that was possible, this is not something the practitioners want to do. And just to mention patching and correcting vulnerabilities or improving the service on the operational technology, it's something that they take. If it's working, the last thing they want is to touch it, of course. So patching becomes, when we say slow to impossible, is because you need to be very careful. Otherwise, you may make your machine stop. A super good example is those mega ships that float at sea, right? Those floating cities, mega ships, they have so many machines here that could power a city, right? They have motors and fuel management and water decontamination and electricity production and everything. Just imagine someone getting in there and saying, yeah, just update yourself from so and so vendor. That those things will never happen. It's so complex. It has to be done with finesse. So the point is, OT and IT merging together into what we call now IIoT is a big problem, because we see this more and more and more. And not forgetting that anything that is on the network becomes a potential point of presence for an attacker. So back to the dishwasher or the fridge example, because I know my fridge tries to connect to the internet, and I had a lot of trouble to bypass this and say, no, you Samsung fridge, you're not going onto the internet because you're a fridge, you should not. Again, my perspective. Those devices, they are on the network. So if they get breached for whatever the reason, or if an attacker gets into your network, long story short, and they can get into the fridge as any other computer that was vulnerable, now they have control of computing capability on your network. So from there, they can try and hack somewhere else, they can try and move laterally. So any of those Internet of Things devices become a point of presence into a network. So imagine at the level of a big company that has cameras and gates and vending machines and everything. When all of that ends up on the same network, that would be a bad idea. We need segmentation. But the point is, if they get together onto the same network, we're up for a big party that could turn up very dirty very soon. I'll stop at that. Aggravating factor. So why is it tougher and tougher to defend our networks and our companies the more time progresses? Well, the attack surface is just progressing. It goes so fast with the convergence that we just described. The software, the new software that come in, and we want to test and we want to add those capabilities. AI, that was not even a thing 5 years ago for the general market. It's there, right? So it goes so fast and so big. Hyper connectedness, when we look about 5G, 6G, and more. So your car is connected nowadays. So with all the capabilities and all the benefits we could get from that, it's the network footprint and the attack surface of our digital lives, personal lives or corporate lives, that just extend with any new device or any new software we put in. AI that we just mentioned. You heard in the news about Mythos and all those new generation and very powerful AI models that can do more and more and more by the day. Again, these are just tools, but tools so powerful that when you know how to use them, they just cut on time, they just cut on energy, and they permit a speed, a finesse, and sometimes they permit feats that were not possible a couple months ago. So how do we defend against that? It's probably possible, but we're going to need to address it in new ways. Is there a skills gap in the market? Yes, no, maybe, depending on who you ask. I think there's a lot of people, but it's finding the right competence for the right role, for the right objective in a company. That's not always easy because IT in general, technology, cyber, digital, is so wide. There's so many competences, there's so many verticals inside of that, that it's not always easy for decision makers, for hiring managers or HR to figure out. So it delays, most of the time, it delays hiring and finding the right person, even when they're available. And sometimes they're not. And again, cybercrime, just because they make money, they're not going to stop because they like it. With the likes of cryptocurrencies, the cloud facilitates everything because computing is so distributed nowadays that it makes it more easy for them to move, to compute, to hide themselves. For good or for worse, the cloud is here to stay, right? So you get the point. The supply chain, big concept supply chain, like the physical supply chain where you get orders from a vendor that get on a train, and you get your boxes somewhere delivered to your door, and then you get the something that you ordered. What if that chain gets compromised at some point, and what you would expect from a reputable vendor ends up being dirty, compromised, infected, or not what it should have been, and sometimes in a way that you would not expect. So those kind of intrusions happen in the real life in terms of supply chain, but real life, not saying it's easy, is more palpable, it's more visual, it's more inspectable. If you don't get what you expected in a box, if you don't get the right vegetables or the right order of a piece of machinery or something, that's visually speaking, it should be more obvious. And again, I'm making it very simple. But in terms of digital risk, the supply chain, the equivalent concept, there's so much of the software and computing capabilities and digital tools that we use that come from somewhere we don't even know about. Absolutely not. So at today, that risk in that global supply chain means that my providers, suppliers, and partners, some of them I do not know about because they're so far down the chain, all become part of my liability, me offering a service to someone else if I get breached because of that vulnerable software by someone else. Let's make it easy with
We
a
have a
graph here.
question in the chat just to find out.
Please, 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 please. I've got too many windows here.
Mm-hmm.
Let me open up that chat. Where is it? Okay, should be here. As I said, we're good with technologies. Okay, I got it here. Wow, so many questions. Yeah, personal scams, we went through this. I'm going to scroll to the bottom. So thank you, Christopher. What do you expect the developing trend to be as the AI technology becomes more sophisticated, and how can it be countered? Very, 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 very good question. And I think this whole presentation, if we don't get to the end, you're going to get the content at some point because the goal is not to cram and just get to the end. Okay, it's a marathon, it's not a run. Just a word on AI here. AI as a computing capability, I'm super anti AI myself, even if I use it on a daily basis. Of course, I use it. It's an awesome tool. It summarizes stuff that I don't want to read. It summarizes videos I don't want to read. It helps me code. We could talk about code. It doesn't produce complete software applications and packages. I think that's a unicorn. If we see this one day, Yes, maybe, but it would take so much babysitting to lead a tool like this to produce something very serious. But again, if you don't have the capability to code yourself, babysitting an AI to do it is maybe a possibility. So on a daily basis, super, super useful AI. I use it for very legitimate purposes. You can expect that there's so many illegitimate or illegal purposes people would want to use it with, and it works beautifully also. It goes fast, it summarizes, it solves some kind of complex problem faster than the human brain would do. And you can iterate on this and just refine what you're asking. And the thing is just going to keep on giving, 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 giving without being tired. The only thing is price. Nowadays, they're starting to charge more and more and more by tokens because those AI providers at the other end, LLM or Gen AI or whatever you want to call it, we're going to say AI. So those capabilities cost a fortune to run at the other end. And the general user, since ChatGPT and all those tools are available on your mobile and computer, it's easier now to just Google a question into OpenAI to get an answer that would have been a very dry result from Google. Even if Google does a lot of pre-processing of their results, you get the point. The whole searching the internet turned to AI, and those search engines turned also to AI. So they run AI queries on what you're asking. So you can imagine the computing that it's asking at the other end. So long story short, those providers are starting, if you pay for them, of course, in the enterprise with a business contract, they're starting to charge even more and more by the token, meaning the more you use, the more you get charged. And the price, I don't have the list right now, but for my Breach Commander application, I do some AI for summaries, AI last, not AI first. But the point is, I'm very aware that depending on the model you use at the other end, so the finesse, the size of its brain, what it can keep in its mind to give you a reflection instead of just forgetting every time you ask a question. So all those different parameters makes the model very, very expensive depending on what you're using. So the point is, it's costing a lot of money, it's very powerful, and it works. So how do we defend against this? We're going to have to be smart about it. Is it going to be technical in terms of response? There's going to be some technical response to this, and there's already vendors that say, hey, we secure AI and whatnot. But I think it's going to be about governance. It's going to be about good choices. It's going to be, again, raising the bar and the helicopter here about how should we address this. I'm going to make a stupid example here. I think, okay, and that's a statement that I do in some technical meetings when you address the risk. I say, okay, you're telling me, Mr. and Mrs. CEO or CTO, you have issues with email and email is insecure and you get breached because of email phish messages and malicious emails. Okay, it's no problem. Email would not be a problem if you would not be using email in your company. Of course, everybody's going to react saying it's ridiculous. Okay, it's a counter argument that it's not even practical. But if you get that closer to reality, okay, you don't want to get rid of email because for some reason you need it, and I get it. What if you disable all the beautifulness in email and you remove the HTML rendering of the email so that everything that is technically computing, like JavaScript and those subtle links and blah blah blah, what if we make them disappear or become more obvious because those emails are not rendered on your screen? Yes, it would make email super ugly to read because it would be super raw in terms of text and formatting, but it would be more secure. Same thing with AI. If we stopped using AI, there would be no AI problem. Not gonna happen because it's a tool, we should embrace it, most probably, etc., etc. So now how do we govern it? How do we frame it? How do we manage the risk? I think is more where we're gonna go in terms of disaster recovery planning, the DRP. We're gonna come to that in a second, and the IRP. If we think we have if AI becomes a source of intrusions or a source of lack of trust, or if AI starts working against us, how do we react? Not technically, because there's going to be technical responses and people good for this. There's always good people to do the technical stuff. But us as decision makers in terms of what's right, what's good versus bad? So those tough decisions that are mostly not binary, how do we approach this in terms of disabling those tools? Yes, but with for the same reason, when we have an incident, AI related or not, one of the easy questions for me to ask is, okay, if you do not need the internet connectivity for your company, which is already a problem, right? We need the internet to work. I get it. If you didn't need the internet to work, it would have been easy to cut the internet. So that's one of the first questions we're going to ask. You got breached, you think you have a data leak, you're not too sure what's going in and out, and the attacker may be still in. So ideally, we should cut the internet. What do we think of this, Mr. and Mrs. CEO or responsible for risk management? And it gets into a very, very tough discussion. The question is easy to ask. The decision is tough. If I cut my internet, I'm going to cause a whole slew of problems that I don't have right now. But right now, I have a data leak, uncertainty, and an attacker probably in and out of my network. You got to choose one of the poisons, right? On top of the fact that in some aspects, you may not have the choice, because if you have a data leak that's active and everything, if you don't deal with it in some aspects, and cutting the internet may be one of them, you become very complicit of that, you become negligent, and you expose yourself to more problems in the future, like we were discussing. So easy questions for us to ask, but when you get into the boardroom or the management room, how do we address this concretely? So that's where your incident response plan and those discussions on a daily basis become very important, because deciding to cut the internet or the network path is relatively, it's tough to decide, and it's going to be relatively easy for those who do it. They're going to unplug a cable or firewall something in some kind of technical control. So always those decisions are tough, even if they're easy to implement. So that's why we should address this from the top to bottom angle, where we discuss why should we do something, because doing it at some point will be relatively easy. We should not let the decision being taken by the easy aspect. No, we maintain it because we need the connectivity, or we cut it because it should stop. Well, we should discuss about this. It's never black or white at our level, I think. And AI is the same. I'll move a bit quick here, okay? Software supply chain, we all got the point. The example, I know that it's one of the questions I ask very frequently, even before it became a real case. Just imagine if any of your favorite software, application, app on your phone, or service that you're using, imagine one of them becomes rogue overnight, okay? It was good, it was secure, it cared about your data and yourself, and overnight, it still offers a service, but in the background, they're stealing your data, they're changing your data, they're reselling your data, they're spying on you, etc., overnight. What if it happens? And just consider the quantity of software that we use that we don't really know where they come from. Yes, they come from the Apple Store or the Windows Store or the Google Store. Yes, but really, do we know? And there's so many software that are coded by a guy in his basement or a girl in his basement. Okay, whether it's 2, 3, 5 people, it's still a solo endeavor. Notepad++ is one of those examples as a software that I'm gonna say everybody use, like a lot of people use, and especially the technical people that wanted a better notepad on their computer with more functionalities and everything. That software is made by a guy in his basement. And my point is, I was always saying, if I was a bad guy, I would just try and hack Notepad++. And by doing this, overnight, I would have access and I would breach all those consumers of Notepad++ that would consume the next auto update, because the application was mostly auto updated on people's machine. So it's just one of those examples that was very concrete before it became even one thing. So now extrapolate to everything we're using, and like we were saying, some kind of piece of software that's built by someone that we forgot a long time ago, that's just considered as a basic structure that's built into something else. There's so many of them that we use, and threat actors know this. So that's why the supply chain, if you can hack something that's down the line, that could lead up to gaining access and putting vulnerabilities in systems that we would not see it coming. Cybercrime, we've been discussing about it, so I'll go fast, okay? Statistics are statistics, but the point is they generate money. So that's why they're here to stay. One of the most interesting is CrowdStrike recently published that the fastest e-crime breakout, so from in to actions to out with the payload that they have observed was 27 seconds. Mere seconds. That's fast. So in terms of defense, we were talking about AI and how do we defend against this? Well, they got in, they got out. It could have taken months. In that case, it took 27 seconds. So one of the conclusions to this is that the faster the attack is, and AI is just speeding that up, the hardest it's going to be to break the chain once the chain is active. So from exploiting a vulnerability, finding a vulnerability, exploiting the vulnerability, getting in, doing something internally, spying, deploying malware, exfiltrating data, and blah, 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 getting out and wiping the traces in some aspects. The time is so short that we need to move into it's a mindset that we always had in terms of incident management, but it's assume breach. Okay. We don't know when it's going to happen, but it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. So what do we do after? And why am I saying, okay, we should try and break attacks while they're active? Yes, it's true. Not all attacks will take 27 seconds. This is the fastest, and it's kind of it's an outlier into the graph. But it gets to the point that, okay, am I going to be able to stop the attacker while they're doing something? In most instances, not, because you have to find them, and then some of them are so fast that it's tough to get them. You see the numbers on the screen. It's so big, the amount of money. It would outrank many of the GDPs, so the domestic gross products of most countries. This is scary. So behind that, there's money. So that's why we know it's going to stay, unfortunately. What facilitates all of this? Well, it's easy to hit on crypto monies and stuff like that. Crypto money and the cryptography and the crypto networks, like the Tor networks, TOR, the Onion router, which was the name originally. Just tools, right, in themselves. The crypto ledgers and the crypto money, the way the ledger is distributed and the transactions are shared and computed by many entities, and the transparency behind that, super great as tools. But those also double-edged swords. They also facilitate what the threat actors are doing. It helps them to hide themselves, to hide their traces, to slow down investigators that try to go after them. Not saying that nowadays cryptocurrencies are not traceable. They're less and less untraceable, but it's a cat and mouse game, right? Because you can split your transactions in many pieces. So the global picture is harder to recombine. So it's tools against tools and AIs against AIs, because AI is going to facilitate all this. But it's not true that cryptocurrencies are not traceable. It's just very hard. But again, aggravating factors that contributed to criminality globally, and it's not going to stop. We spoke about personal data, and another of those great interests of them. So that's another why they're after us and what we have to lose. And the cause. Not all threat actors are made equal. They can vary from the opportunistic teenager in their basement up to espionage, terrorism, and warfare at the nation states, and everything in the middle, okay? And that middle is where most of the attacks come from. And I'm not saying there's no warfare, there's no terrorism, and nation states are not active on the cyber realm. They are, okay? But for the majority of organizations, what we should care about on a daily basis is to try and catch those in the middle. The crime, they're going to come after us. They're going to come after our data. They're going to come after what we have and what they could profit from. And it's usually data or presence into our network, because they could sell that to someone else. And just fun facts about ransomware. Ransomware or cryptoware kind of attacks, where they encrypt your data, and then they kind of lock your computer and they show a red message saying, hey, you owe me this amount of Bitcoin because your data is encrypted. If you want it back, you got to pay me. Very, very smart, very, very easy. It works. It used to work. It still works, and it's going to continue working for an unforeseeable time. And the ransomware in itself used to be it. Okay, you wanted to encrypt the data for a cash grab, and that was it. And it was also possible to exfiltrate data, but let's remember 10 years ago, 15, maybe 20, okay? Networks were not as fast as they are today. The cloud adoption and the cloud storage was not as present. So exfiltrating the data, stealing the data from a network or from a company was cumbersome. You needed to download that data to you, the attacker, and it was cumbersome. So we saw those kind of attacks, but you really needed as an attacker to have an interest in the data, to exfiltrate the data, and not as a bonus. Fast forward to 20 years, most of the attacks we see nowadays are multi-stage, and the possibilities are endless. So let's say you get into a network, you get into a corporation's network, okay, big or small, as an attacker. What's your goal? Well, depends. What are my possibilities? What's on the menu? Well, you can steal data. Yeah, you could resell data. Yeah, maybe I could do this. You want to get personal data. You want to know something about someone. You want to know something about a lot of someone that you could resell, right? Because privacy is big. Do you want to blackmail them? Because the regulators would be very mad if they would know that you stole personal data. So, okay, that's a possibility to make money because that's my menu, right? And what's the easiest? And you look at that menu and you pick and choose. Ransomware is one of them. Like locking the data after encrypting it in some way and then asking for money to decrypt it. Companies have backups, right? Yes. And Don, I remember we spoke about this quite recently. Yes, backups are good, but backups of independent pieces in a complex application scenario. Let's say you have your storefront that has the website, and you've got middleware, and you've got database behind that, and it interacts with many other systems. Even if you have backups of those systems independently of one another, doesn't mean you're going to be able to put it back together if you restore those backups. So to that point, ransomware is still very effective because technical people know that rebuilding an Active Directory from independent servers that were backed up even minutes or seconds from one another, reconnecting all those transactions and to make the things as if nothing happened, like back in time from an hour or a day or a week, it sounds easier than it is. So ransomware, encrypting the data is still very valid as a kind of attack. Long story short, okay, that's already long as a story. Bear with me, please. You get into the network, so you use those many components. So you got in, okay. Did somebody find me? No, nobody's panicking, etc. I see data. Yeah, okay. So we can try and exfiltrate data. So the data exfiltration is usually there. Putting a foothold, so running software, a backdoor to come back into the network, whether it's credentials or software permitting that access, is usually something they do. So they persist so that access could be resold to someone else, or they could come back in some future if they wanted. So they exfiltrate, they establish a foothold, and then once they're in, they could tamper with your data. So changing numbers in a database, I mean, if we switch the comma or the dot one way or another, in terms of numbers, it multiplies or divides by 10. So if that database field is a money field, well, it means 10 times more, 10 times less. Fraud is very possible. So you can play with the integrity of the data, sometimes without the knowledge of people. And long story short, ransomware at the other end. Yeah, my dogs are barking too. It's kind of an echo in my ears. And ransomware is very possible also, as it adds insult to injury, where they already exfiltrate your data. They have a backdoor to come back in, and then they press you into a ransomware at the end, which is conveniently also a way to cover their traces, because a lot of companies, when they get a ransomware incident, they're going to try and fast be back online by restoring machines and reinstalling machines and servers and stuff like that, which in most instances erases the trace if they haven't planned to do forensics based on an incident response plan. So long story short, ransomware nowadays is way more complex than it used to be, thanks to networking and cloud, which makes data exfiltration way more easy. Conclusion, they can come to you with many types of ransoms. They can ransom you for, hey, I have your data, it's out, it's in my hands, I'm going to publish it if you don't pay me. Okay? And if I don't pay you, well, first it's possible for me to publish it, but then there's a more subtle form of ransom where they could target some of your partners, customers, and trusted relationships and blackmail them towards them, saying, hey, your data got leaked, or that secret that you thought was secret, well, it's not a secret because they leaked it. So they pin you against one another. So that's one of the ransoms that they could do, which is less public, it's more targeted, and it works very well also. And then, as if it wasn't enough, you got to pay me because your data is encrypted and your servers are not working. So ransomware, always bad. We're getting better at fighting ransomware. But again, the technical plans to fight ransomware are less efficient than having the paper plan of how am I going to approach this proactively and then in the response after this. Because when you get a ransomware, well, you're denied.
Yeah, we have
Yes,
a question
please.
from Sarah. And actually, I've been dating because Sarah, I think it's a very close topic to you.
Yes,
Please.
yes, it is. Hi, nice
Can-
to meet you. So I
Hi,
have
Sarah.
two
Thank you.
questions. So
Please.
one is more, I would say, ethical, philosophical, and the other one is technical, based on the ransom subject you were elaborating on. First of all, with the ransom, I ask myself, can we really trust that all databases will be deleted? Because based on what's going on recently, I would say, in the software chain, partially not really well managed. We have as well in Europe the directives that will be implemented in each countries. I'm not really aware if each activity is really, I would say, recovered after a ransom, just someone paid the money. So I would be interested to hear, first of all, your opinion about.
Very good question. Again, all the ransomwares are not created equal. Considering that some of those criminals have ethics, that's kind of a weird sentence to start from. The model of ransomware, of course, you know all this, but I'm speaking to the courier, right? The business model is based on, if I give you back your data, it justifies the payment you just made. So we had a deal, I got my money, you paid, you got your data, everybody's happy. So it perpetuates the model and the trust that victims will have into getting back their data, enticing them into paying if it happens to them, versus, well, I'm not sure I'm going to get the data, or I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get the data, so screw you with the payment, you're not going to get it. So the business model, the criminal business model, it is built on this. Now, how do they implement the cryptography? Well, it depends. Some serious threat actors, those that have, like we're seeing on screen, it's a good segue. Some of them do it so professionally, they have support on their websites. So you remember the likes of the website that were taken down recently, Silk Roads and some others like this, where they were selling hitmen and killing of people and drugs and trafficking and blah, blah, blah. And also criminal services like this. Well, some of them are so professional that they have all this. They have an online store with bundles and support and discounts like you see in here. And back in there, it's white collar crimes, right? You have people that are very good at doing, I don't know, code or AI or managing IT that could do it for a corporation, a legitimate corporation during the day, and could do it illegitimately at night, whether they want to do it or getting forced by it. Because sometimes you're in those kind of organizations where you cannot get out without naming them. So long story short, some of them are very professional. Those that are doing it professionally, the business model, to my experience, is mostly respected. Meaning, if you have a server, so the ransomware got inside, right? And nowadays, the ransomware is more targeted than just trying to encrypt every machine, because some of those machines are, I'm not going to say pointless, but it's most of the time it's not really interesting to encrypt the user devices when you have access to the servers, where it really hurts the company, even if there's some intent in making offline some of the workstation, VIP users and stuff. But then again, servers. And if you get encrypted on a server, it depends how you encrypt it. If you get onto the machine, like if you had access to the keyboard and you encrypt file by file by file, which is not the most convenient way for them to do. And we're going to get back to this with virtualization and stuff like that. But if you encrypt the files independently, it's easy to restore those files because it's a reversible process. I encrypt, and then you give me the key, and I decrypt. The file is back. For a database, how do you encrypt a database? Well, you could encrypt field by field by field, like if it was an Excel sheet, let's say, or a Power BI form. It's possible also, but there's also other ways to disable a system while not encrypting it or preventing access to it. So the ransomware aspect is not always a direct translation into the data will be encrypted, but I'm going to deny access to that something so that you are enticed as a victim to pay me to get it back. One of the points I have about this is if they can access the hypervisor, so the virtualization software that runs virtual software, virtual Windows, virtual Linux, virtual databases, if they can access the hypervisor and encrypt the meta container of the machine, they do not get into the machine and encrypt file by file by file. They encrypt the machine in itself because the machine stands in the file. So there's different ways of encrypting the data and to make it very convenient for them. And depending on how they do it, recovering from a ransomware, it changes the technical aspects. Like we were saying, let's say my Active Directory, okay, the authentication brain into a Windows network, okay, which is disappearing slowly but surely, but that authentication server is so critical to a network domain into an enterprise that you have backups for this. But nowadays, we know that if I have multiple, because I have multiple geographies, multiple Active Directory servers on my network, and then they all get encrypted, yes, they had backups. But the day you say, okay, no problem, I'm not going to pay the ransom. I'm just going to use my backups because I have them, right? And it's good practice. I'm going to restore them. So put them back into the state they were yesterday or an hour ago or last week. The fresher, the best, right? The freshest, the best. And then they should reconnect all together, right? And all the authentication and the user properties and everything should all match, right? The answer is no. It's more complex than this. And the same apply to databases and very distributed complex applications where the state of the data, if we had backups that were at the instant exact microsecond where the data was present, it would be easier to reconnect all of this after the fact. But most of the time, backup cycles and how and when the data is stored, it's already complex enough that the timings most of the time don't match like this. So it's always a nightmare to bring it back. It doesn't say that we should not back up. Backups are great. You need them. But we need to speak as leaders, we need to speak with our backup experts and data experts to know, okay, in terms of, and we're getting into the plannings, right? Let's see if I can jump into a further aspect to this. We'll go fast to jump into this. Let's speak with them about the disaster recovery planning, okay? DRP, disaster recovery plan, which we're going to see is part of a sequence of plans. Those plans should be able to tell us in very, very, very precise sequence, if something happens bad to some part of my ecosystem, how do I first transition to a temporary environment to rebuild it clean and to make it clean? How do I repair what's broken? And if worse comes to worse, I lose my computing capabilities, my apps, my data, my code, how do I rebuild by hand? My experience, besides banks, some military, not all, some nuclear facilities and mature organizations that that predate the history of computing like we know. Very good examples of companies like this. An insurance company I worked for in Canada used to do it like this. The guys were freaks. They had binders of instructions to rebuild everything from any state. I haven't seen this in most of the companies I dealt with. So the DRP component is one of the most important plans. And in the case of ransomware, should you lose some of the data or need to restore some data that is out of sync and everything, how do I resync all of this? Sometimes it's going to take, most of the time, it's going to require stitching back together records that, hey, okay, those were co-occurring, coexisting. Some of them were generated after, so they're going to have to be considered a loss in terms of transactions. But we have to do this, again, us as leaders. Technically speaking, it's going to be a nightmare most of the time. But us as leaders, everything that you will find as discardable in terms of sync, because it didn't exist at some point in time for some of the systems, so we need to discard it. We need to account for it, because those transactions, whether they could be financial in some aspects, they have to be accounted for. So we have to do it. The pressure is there. Everybody's rushing to restore from a ransomware or something, and it's in the news, and everybody's bitching about it, of course. But we still need to take time and do the forensics aspects and the stitching. It's going to need a lot of leadership on our part. I've seen good examples of this. I'll shut up. Too many words here, but does it insert a part of your question, Sarah?
Yeah, partially. So I will skip the
please.
second one. Maybe we have a possibility for a chat after.
Yes, absolutely. And then maybe it's going to be partially answered, right? Cybersecurity, to get into how do we address this, right? Because we haven't spoken about, okay, what do we do now? This is one of the memes I really like. It's been taken on the internet and redone by us. Raising the bar. Sometimes having perfect security is not the goal. Improving over time is, and raising that bar so that you're not a low-hanging fruit. Because some of those threat actors, a lot of them, they're going to get in because they can, because it's easy, because you're part of a data breach, a part of a leak, and they know that you have some systems with vulnerability. So raise that bar, and then you should get out of that low-hanging fruit and then continue improving. So that meme is very, very accurate. When we talk about information security, cybersecurity, or security in the digital realm, CIA, nothing with the CIA from the USA, but the acronym is the same. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In most companies, if you ask them, and it should be part of the BCP, the business continuity plan, we should know what matters to us as an entity. We should know what are the priorities, the functions, the mission of the organization. And most of the time, availability is an essential component, because if my services are not working, I'm not selling services, or my people cannot work. But how much? How much of that availability, back to the half-joking solution of let's cut the internet so you have no problem with no internet, right? How much of that could be true in case of a crisis? So we have to go beyond that. No, we cannot turn off the services because we don't make money and blah, blah, blah. On top of the fact that if you cut your services, you are proactively broadcasting a signal that, hey, this is not working, so customers are going to start to bitch. So sorry for the language, to whine and report it. So we're going to need to address that in terms of PR. The two that are more subtle are confidentiality and integrity. Confidentiality, we get it. No company wants to see its secrets go out. But sometimes that confidentiality, because it's less palpable, it's less feelable, at least at the original moment, it's a problem most of the time for the future when that data is used against you. But confidentiality is often seen as I care about confidentiality, but can you bring back my applications faster? We need them to be online. So my pledge to you is let's fight against this, what I call the tyranny of availability. And I mean this with respect. When everybody's screaming and everybody's on fire, of course, we need to rebuild and put the services back on. But if something else needs to be done before that, whether it's forensics, finding more information about how we're going to address this, and securing the global perspective for the business, let's have the people that are stressed about availability calm down, take a Xanax or something, and then address it in order, right? Because it's easy, because it's palpable and feelable. Integrity is way more subtle. The example I was discussing with the databases, change the dot from one position or another. It changes tens of dollars into millions of dollars, and vice versa. It could be disastrous, and sometimes you don't feel it because it's so subtle. You've been intruded, and somebody changes something in some systems. How would I know? But it could make a difference for a customer that starts paying less for their services, or somebody else starting to pay more, etc., etc. You get the point. So integrity is most often the lesser child, the child with the less care, but it's also the most subtle. But we need to consider it in terms of philosophy, especially at our levels. As you see on the graph there, most of the time the affected components report it, right? Because again, this one comes to Verizon DBIR. I owe them nothing. It's just that I like the content that they publish, but CrowdStrike and IBM and Microsoft have also very good reports. Affected components, confidentiality in most of those cases, following with the others. And most of the time, it's internal data types that were exfiltrated. But you can see, following not too far from there, credentials and personal. Personal meaning privacy, like we saw, which has a super huge resale value in blackmail. But credentials, what do you do with credentials? So passwords, username, passwords, certificates to get into a system. They are a means of access for more access from the attacker, either for them to move laterally across your systems or to resell them to someone else. Because a foot in the door, a foothold into your network has a value on the black market for someone else. Hey, another way to make money.
Hey, JS.
Please.
Sorry. So
Please. No,
connecting
please.
the dots, when we think about things like availability and yesterday's efficiencies become today's vulnerabilities, and just connecting the dots with the question that Helga put in the chat, and the question being, can SaaS solutions for anonymization support compliance? How much should we rely on them in governance? How should people get involved in such processes since we're the weakest link of the system? And from a board governance standpoint, right, it's actually really understanding, going back a few slides, where IT and OT intersect, and right, and where sort of these IIoT devices, where they create that connectivity. And from a governance standpoint, it's thinking about things like, do we even have an inventory of all of those connections? Do we really understand where they are in our systems, how they're changing with updates? Where does anonymization come in? Where is it help, for example? And how do we, how do we distinguish between, the threat of losing information or having it compromised and the physical safety of people, especially when you're thinking about, more non-financial institutions, right? Because the threats can be quite different. So I
So
know
true.
there's such a rich conversation and dialogue, and we'll probably not get through it all. I hope we'll be able to spend more time, Marina. I know there's a three-part series, but could you just address that before you go into sort of this next section that you
Yeah,
have?
absolutely down. Again, fantastic question. It ties into, you said, inventory and knowing in advance, and knowing what we have to protect, right? I tie this into the BCP, so business continuity plan, a big placeholder for most organizations, but basically the intent of the BCP is simple, even if it's hard. It's one of those things, simple to state, but how do I do this and what do I put in it? We're going to go with the IRP just after. BCP, knowing what is it we do here? What's our purpose? What's our functions? What's our mission? What do I have? What kind of data do I treat? What do I keep? It's all those questions that at a higher level, we have a rough idea, especially when it's about the mission, the purpose, the functions, et cetera, et cetera. But the more we drill down into how does this materialize into the kind of applications, the type of data I treat, I process, I store, and I could lose or get stolen. The BCP and the processes behind under it are where we should address those conversations, because we're going to need top to bottom and bottom to top conversations that are tough, right? Because when you ask some kind of IT administrator that's already super busy doing whatever they do during the day, whether it's authentication, they do PKI, they do coding, they do SecOps, they do antivirus management or whatnot. What kind of data do you treat? I mean, it's going to come as another email in that person's inbox, and it's going to take time to get those answers, unless we have a real leadership about, hey, this is important here. We need to address this. And again, to respond to an incident, it's super important to know what I have, to be able to rebuild something in a state it was in when it was breached or destroyed or encrypted. Well, I should know the state it was in and what data it had, et cetera, et cetera. So going back to the backups, and more than the backups, how is it built, and do we even have access to that technology? I found a computer in a bank that is not going to be named here, where there was a room with two ACs. The room was locked, and in the middle of the room, there was this huge but small for the bank, a computer just sitting on the floor with one cable going in and the electricity going in. And that computer was beige, and it was super ugly, and it was super critical, and nobody knew how to rebuild it. It's a lived experience. So in terms of inventory, in some aspects, when asking those questions, we could be surprised. So it's an ongoing work, inventory of what we have, not just the data. So the mission, the functions, the services, the data, the applications, the users we have. I mean, knowing who is authorized and who's legitimate in your organization is also very, very important in terms of authentications, in terms of identities. Easier said than realized, right? But it has to be known. Otherwise, we cannot fight the fight, because we have no idea what we have, what we should protect, and what's normal. And it gets into, when you get into analysis, whether it's business risk analysis or technical analysis, is this connection from that person, from that country, legitimate to that service? Unless you have very good identity systems, how would I know? And it goes into very, very good segue down about attackers that just live off the land. When we say live off the land, basically, as defenders need to be right all the time. Okay, I'm just shooting a couple of slides to before I show you the bonus that's part of the end of the conversation here. Defenders, like a castle, they need to protect everything, every doors, every windows, every cranny, any nook, the walls, the gates, and everything, every time, every single day. And at some point, it's going to fail. Big or small, it's going to fail. Threat actors themselves, all they need is one shot, one opportunity. Okay, not to quote Eminem on this, but one shot, one opportunity, where they're going to be able to get in. And some of those threat actors, back to the slide where we showed that some of them were very patient, some of them were very determined, well-financed. If they need to get into your organization, if they want, if they have the will, they will. Unfortunately, that's one of our conclusions. Pardon me. I'm going to swipe to. And one of the reasons why you mentioned inventory and knowing what we have in terms of board and in terms of leadership, threat actors nowadays, when they breach into your organizations, a lot of the times they're going to do what we call live off the land. They're going to use our tools, our identity platforms, our software, our credentials, our systems to do their mischievous deeds the same way we would do it. Okay, and it's easy, it's normal. They get into a system, so they have access, let's say, to an administrator's machine. Well, what can they do? Well, they can administer the network like that administrator would do, meaning connecting to it, making changes to it, deleting data, adding data, and so on and so forth. So living off the land, whether it's for remote access, lateral movement, persistence, etc., they do it. It's just super elegant. But the problem is that it's super difficult to know when it's legitimate or not. So back to the inventories and knowing what we have, what we should defend, and limiting that posture as much as possible, even if it goes fast and everybody wants the tools and toys, it's a challenge. The kill chain is one of the concepts. And again, we're going to share the content so that we can go into more examples. But the kill chain is one of those very, very interesting mappings of, okay, all attacks are not similar, but from A to Z, an attack usually starts from somewhere and goes somewhere else. Okay, some orders may be inverted in some points. They're going to do reconnaissance. They're going to try and know what we have. They're going to try and breach in. So that intrusion, once they're in, what they're going to try to do, exploit us, delete, install code, persist. And exfiltration is most of the time a goal, stealing your data. So we can see it as a chain, right? There's different models. You could add steps, remove steps. But the point is, in that temporally and logically sequential kind of chain, if we break the chain, we win. For now, okay? Sometimes it's late. If we catch the attacker and we were able to clean up the incident before they exfiltrated the data, before they did the crypto locker, even if it's just before, well, we win. Ideally, we would move that breaking the chain upstream so that we can catch them sooner than later. But again, you get the point. But the problem is, incidents, they're going to happen. And like we said, it's more of a when and not an if. And to me, my job has been easy for most of the last 20 years. And if you get into mature companies, and most companies don't have that maturity, but it's ideal when you have a company that's mature. You say, okay, just don't panic, grab your IRP, and let's follow the process. Because ideally, that process is going to define what an incident is. Okay, so that's one of the big parts, because before I show you the slide for cut and paste, before we adjourn, we have to know what's an incident, because incident is a big word and it can mean many things for many people. So we propose a definition of that, okay, where it's an impact on confidentiality, availability, and integrity, including privacy, and it's abnormal, it's unexpected, and usually it's broader than something that can be managed on one person's machine in terms of impact, in terms of data loss, and blah blah blah. So we need those criteria, okay, that can be very factual and very very counted in terms of how much data went out and what's the speed of the progression and how many machines are down, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to define that. And then sometimes it's interchangeable in terms of terminology, but what's a crisis? Well, a crisis, if you don't put cyber in front of it, a crisis is a crisis. The business has a problem, right? And when we talk about a very severe cyber incident, if it impacts the business, well, the two overlap. It's a business crisis that has a cyber or digital flavor, right? So it needs to be treated at our level, where we deal with finance, we deal with HR, we deal with risk before, or at least at least as much as the technical people would try to do what they have to do to clean up the incident, to contain and to explain what happened, and also making sure that we guide them into answering what matters for the business. Because sometimes what matters for the technical people, with great respect, it matters to them. But is it what the business needs? So we need to treat a crisis like it is, right? And very briefly, when I speak to CEOs and board members, most of the time, when you get into mature companies, you hear all sorts of things that are partially true most of the time. Like, I invested a lot, so my security should be good. I spend more than my competitors, or I'm not a target. Why would they want to attack me? Or I have an insurance. So you can hear all sorts of what ends up being denial about really, you're sleeping well at night. Well, maybe we should revise that, right? We need to make sure that us and our senior stakeholders understand that, hey, it's not because you invest that you're not going to breach, because if they want to get into your network, they will. Okay. Fun fact, and it's not fun. Okay. Tales from the trenches before the slide about the IRP. Quite recently, we did an intrusion test, which we called a red team, red versus blue. So the red team is very patient. It's very determined. It acts as a very determined threat actor would. And basically, they were able to completely breach the company setup, international big company with with solid budgets and solid people, they were able to breach, like a threat actor would do. They sent phishing emails. They had some people fall for the fish amongst the tens of thousands that were phished. You only need a couple to do. They found people that had no multi-factor authentication, MFA, right? No MFA. If you have that, it's even easier because you do not need to go through more codes and getting from the application and blah, blah, blah. Once you're in, what we call password spray, super easy for them. They just tried known easy password like the name of the company and the date, company date, and you tried that. And guess what? There was a couple of people that had that password and a lot of privileges tied to their accounts. So 3 and 4 were done very easily by finding known accounts with weak passwords. Then they were able to escalate the privileges through vulnerabilities and using accounts that had too many privileges into the organization that sometimes we do. We call that privilege creep. It happens. And very shortly after the beginning of the intrusion, the company was completely on its knees, physically speaking, where the threat actors had the keys to the kingdom, to Active Directory, okay, internally, to Azure in the cloud, and they were able to exfiltrate all the data they wanted because they had access to pretty much everything. And if they wanted, they could have taken down any services they wanted because they had access to the virtualization and the machines in themselves. That chain, it happens, it exists. And guess what? When we do a red team exercise, a red team engagement at a company mimicking a real threat actor, if we're patient, sometimes it takes weeks and months, but real threat actors would do that. It works. So the point is, if they want to get into your network, unfortunately, they will. And that's my question to you. And I'm going to leave you at that because you guys have other things to do, I guess. So the question is, how do we process that and what do we move from there? And this is where we get into our sequences or process. And I'm going to show you that slide that I mean. Okay, 2 slides. The first one is the first 72 hours, super critical. We're going to send you that content so that we think is what should be considered. And you can see in there, the only thing that I really care about is saving the volatile evidence, because that volatile evidence will disappear if we do not maintain it. We preserve it, right? Okay, insurance, we talked about it. We could go back at another time. And this is what you may want to screenshot. This is the bonus. Again, if we had to build an IRP into your organization, this is what we would propose as major considerations. And it goes into all those risk and management aspects of the company. Back to what Don was mentioning, knowing what we have, scanning, discovery, and everything, communications, obligations, training that plan. We need playbooks to know what to do, but a playbook is not a technical click here, click there. It's okay. How should we address this as an organization? And let's not forget the humans in this. They're gonna need to eat. They're gonna need to sleep. And if you get into an incident, give or take, a big incident, it's not a matter of days. You're gonna be in there for a couple weeks. So plan for logistics and feeding people and kindergarten, the taking care of the kids, because it's gonna take a couple weeks for sure. And then knowing when it needs to stop. I'll stop at that. I've already taken all the time. All your questions are going to be super, super, super welcome. Okay? Super welcome. I hope we can continue that conversations, perhaps offline. It doesn't have to be recorded. We're part, all of us, even myself too, part of the GCBR. So please reach out to us. I'm not trying to sell services here. It's a conversation, okay? At some point, we can talk money on other aspects. The next step, 2 weeks from now, we get into the tabletop exercise, the tough decision workshop. It's going to be a tabletop exercise, and you guys are going to have the opportunity to use Breach Commander should you will. Any last minute questions for people that have not jumped out already? I'm open. I'm free for the next half an hour.
I have a backlog one, but I would propose if someone else has one, I would give first a turn.
And I'm sorry for taking, as a Canadian, I'm going to say I'm sorry for taking all the time.
Oh, no, all good.
Yeah.
Hey, JS.
Yes.
Oops. I would just say thank you so much for putting this together. I think the key takeaway for me is that with AI. It's not a matter of if you're going to be attacked, it's a matter of when. And whether you are striving to be left of boom or you're finding yourself right of boom, for board directors, certainly we want to understand how long, is there a single point of failure? How long is it going to take, to come back up? And quite frankly, is the business resilient enough, right, to survive this in the end? And it takes a lot of preparation. And I know this is sort of part one of three. But what a great primer, and really appreciative of the time today and looking forward to the next round.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you so much. Very welcome. What you said, I'm drinking your words. If you want to take a screenshot of all of this, again, when we talk about incident management as a holistic practice, with a lot of respect for the technical folks, right? Always, I'm mentioning it as a disclaimer. Let's not consider an incident as a mere IT problem. It's been like this for many, 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 many years. It's starting to get better. Let's move that up to the C-suite. Let's move that up to the board, because we need to address cyber incidents and the crisis that comes with it as a business topic before an IT issue, and making sure that our dear IT people, with all their benevolence and all their will and all their autonomy, respect what we say and at some point obey orders. Otherwise, sometimes we're going to make mistakes. So that's my pledge to all you guys. So thank you so much for attending. Again, all your questions, please send them back.
We have a maybe last one question from Poland.
Yes, please. I'm here, guys.
Sorry, yeah, I like the slide that you've got up at the moment with the incident response and the crisis management. So many people don't talk about crisis management when they talk about cybersecurity. They talk about the cybersecurity and put crisis management into the cybersecurity plan rather than using the crisis management plan that's used for everything else. And I think that often gets missed. So it's nice to see it separated. But my question is, how do you make training for cybersecurity interesting and not just a click-through compliance led exercise, so that people actually start to learn the lessons and don't get caught out by the phishing attacks and stuff like that?
Different aspects for the general population of workers, right? It's tough to do tabletop exercises with them unless there's a lot of maturity in the organizations, which you may have. So when I say tabletop exercise, it's getting into a room, intimate as possible, couple 10, so 15, 20 people max of people with a general like-minded or business needs to be together, and ideally in some aspects from different walks of the things, where you put the C-suite into a room. It's always touchy on the discussions, and then you just throw examples at them. What if? It's all about the what ifs. And that's what we're going to do in the next session. We start from super far. Something happened, and guess what? It's a Friday afternoon, and it's 4 o'clock before a long weekend. And so, somebody notices that something's not right on that application. Or it's Christmas Eve. Guess what? Threat actors know that, right? Because they're going to hit on those timings because they know our guards are down. So tabletop exercising and just throwing what ifs with ideally people from your organizations that have some exposure, or at least that can tell stories, whether they come from reports or storytelling on the internet or real experience by them, that they can tell, yeah, it's cute what you're saying here, but yes, that, but what if da 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 da? And then you progress the mindset and the reflection, and most of the time, it doesn't have to last long, right? It could be 15 minutes, half an hour. Some people, in some companies I've seen doing tabletop exercising or intellect, playing with ideas with people about risk scenarios. Doesn't have to be cyber, right? It could be physical security also. People that come with the right suit, the right card, the right briefcase. Why are they able to get into the data center when they shouldn't have not? Because they look the part. So social engineering is always big. So raising the bar on those aspects with people that on their daily work, They don't know. They don't know. They don't care. And it's normal. But when we socialize them into those aspects, it doesn't have to be long and painful, but just a regular beating and maintaining that awareness. I think it's the concept of awareness. And long story short, putting that into full-blown tabletop exercises like we're going to do next one. Well, you sit people around a theme and you say, no phone, we're going to be here for half of the day, lunch is going to be provided perhaps, and blah, blah, blah. And we don't get out of here until we brainstorm all the ideas we wanted to brainstorm. And then you get into a scenario. Okay, and that scenario may be at some point, blah, 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 ransomware. But you start like we're going to do next time. We start from far and we start asking ourselves, okay, but it's Friday afternoon, 4 o'clock before a long weekend in July, okay, in France. In France in July, Marina, you would know. I mean, there's not a lot of people in July and August in France in the office, especially at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon for cultural and management reasons. And it could happen elsewhere. I'm just joking with the French because I've been working in France for a long time. So what if? Well, so and so would not be on shift. He's on vacation. Well, he's the one who knows about all those systems and blah, blah, blah. So from the first questions you ask, the context makes it that, okay, the response, the questions are kind of easy to ask, right? Where's the BCP? Where's the insurance contract? Who's in charge of that system from that country and blah, blah, blah. And then it takes delays because humans, and it's normal because of vacations, because of unavailability, because of the phone number that was wrong in that IRP, BCP that dates from 10 years ago, and so on and so forth. Again, you get the point. Exercising and just regular beating with people that know what they're talking about. And ideally, reversing that flavor also, where I, as a cyber first practitioner, I'd like to hear about more aspects of the business, about the physical security, about operations, about, okay, these are your concerns when something happened, which are far from IT. But it means in terms of IT, there's a lot that I should take into consideration to support you for your obligations and so it gives perspective to different people. Of course, it takes maturity, but it's really cool when that happens.
Hey, Paul, I know we're pressed for time. I would just add that, oftentimes we talk about culture eating strategy for breakfast. When you are in crisis management mode,
Well said.
that is where culture takes over. And so for a healthy organization, getting people interested is sorting that out ahead of time, right? You figure out where those vulnerabilities are, whether it's technical or whether it's people. And oftentimes the people side, right, that gives you all the clues of, do we have a healthy culture? And it's so, so important. And so that is a way to get people interested and not make it about necessarily the technology, but also where are these human in the loop oversight? Where do we have those opportunities? And to leverage the technology, not to be afraid of it. So I hope that helps as well.
I just love this
Super
slide.
words. The people governance, people
first.
process tools. Yeah, we
People
had
and culture, yes.
skip over it. Yeah, this is one of the most critical slide. And again, it's going to be shared humans first. And again, a hammer, a drill, nails, and screws don't build houses. And if you come to a shop and if you come to a vendor and ask for a drill, a hammer, and nails, they're gonna sell you nails because they sell nails. But okay, but do I have a plan? Do I even know how to build? And so you're not gonna go far with those tools if you have nobody else to take them into their hands and go further with this. Of course, the example is obvious, but it makes it very concrete. And guess what? There's vendors that always have something to sell to solve a problem and make money off. And it's okay. They sell stuff. So they're going to sell you stuff. But if we don't start with people, we fail at step one. We're going to have tools that are either subutilized, completely not utilized, or not configured properly. And they're going to become a liability and a huge chunk of budget going out the window. And people are saying, I didn't even know we had those tools. I heard that recently. Oh, we have that. Yeah, guess what? You have 5 Microsoft tenants into your company. So you're paying, I don't want to name Microsoft, but Microsoft used to be, you have 5 tenants. Yeah, but we're paying 1 million for this one. What do you pay for the other one? times 5, and Microsoft's like, keep it coming. I mean, it's corporate chaos. Somebody profits from there, and I don't blame them. But we need to put our stuff together. People.
May I ask you something about the human perspective? Because I'm a cyber psychologist. That's the reason Marina mentioned recently this field. I ask myself from the European perspective. Recently, I would say the last 3 years, we had a lot of regulations implemented, and when we enable change by law, it's getting up tail by tail. And each corporate is organizing their risk by themselves, I would say. That's a look from the consumer or from the business perspective. The person is announcing some irregular assumptions, not knowing how to. How do we figure it out, especially on, I would say, local paragraphs like the hacking paragraph, where technical capable people are not allowed to talk about? So I think from the human perspective, that's really important to encourage the corporate organizations as well to make some bug bounty programs or open communication layers where they are allowed to speak up. Otherwise, the directives are maybe in some law conflicting by, I would say, European and then national laws. That could be.
So
I don't know if it's interesting as well in France, but I know some different countries have that regulation.
I so agree. I want to let other people respond, but I've seen the two. I mean, companies with strict gag orders on their people. It's like, you never speak about what you do, what happened, especially about the cyber crisis, which could be good in some instances if it's mandated by legal counsel about certain topic, and extending into communications via shadow IT, illegitimate channel that will get discovered in court should something happen. So all of them become liabilities in terms of incident management. So that's why we always say legal counsel, very educated legal counsel about cyber, and well interact. Say, okay, yeah, but if they're using Teams internally and Slack and Signal and SMS and everything, all of those messages will be admissible to be discovered in court. So every time you say, shit, we got breached, sorry for the language, well, shit, we got breached, ends up in court. It's kind of a good admission, right? When you're the CFO.
For sure.
I do.
And I've seen this also, and that was kind of painful. We had a very good everything, and then shit, we got breached. And they served us up like right at the end after all the pleas. Like, yeah, you admitted it on the first night. Like,
JS.
So yeah, yes, please.
Just having been the customer facing, right, facing off with a public company's largest customers during a federal and state data breach investigation, I will say that it was a shock to the system internally and externally, right, when we're going into that crisis mode. What we found helpful, especially internally, right, in the absence of having facts, people make them up in their head. And then you can have multiple narratives running around that you cannot control. And the biggest support that we found to counteract that was actually just to explain the why. And it's fairly simple, right? You move over from, the ways of working that are typically, run the business, right, for a corporation to more of a military way where you're locking things down. And just simply explaining that moving and doing that shift is about actually catching the malfeasant. If we're open during the crisis about what's happening, you're actually announcing what you're doing to the very person or network that you're trying to catch. And so for us, it was more about the why. And yes, and sort of the transparency is answering those questions as opposed to getting into the mechanics of the how. I don't know if that's helpful. It is tough when you're in a crisis situation, you want to be transparent, right? And asking the questions that you can. And sometimes, like, it's a double-edged sword about, technically, right? Answering policy versus, technical questions. But at least helping people understand why you're not answering something, because most are going to be vested in catching that individual and ensuring, and most importantly, ensuring that you get past the incident, that the business survives and it never happens again.
That's well said. Drinking your words once again. I mean, it's chaotic, right? And that's why incident management is not a paper thing and a plan. I always say this to people saying, yeah, but it's going to take years to put something in. Start with something. A plan is better than no plan. Okay? Because at least it forces a reflection, it forces an intellectual exercise, it forces communication that somehow will be good. Okay? Somehow. And then even the best plans, if you get to the other end of the spectrum, again, my perspective, you get into those companies that had those binders with the plans were so awesome on paper that you would have sent to an AI and say, okay, what the step one of what should I do? Now, I mean, you could not figure out what to do because the plan was so paper based. So that's why making it human, making it accessible, and knowing that a plan is just a plan. You need those leaders. You cannot say, yeah, I went to a big four and they sold me this magical IRP that sits on the shelf, by the way, in some organizations, and now I have the plan. But by the way, I don't know how to use it. It's been said to me a lot of times because it's about leadership and it's never easy. And I don't know, Don and you, Sarah, and others, that the easiness of managing those crises, but the ones I've been involved in, and it was never about my money and my assets. I cannot imagine the emotional impacts when you're part of the breach yourself. But it's never easy. It's always chaotic. There's always something that goes sour, and I think it's normal. So that's why leadership comes back. And like you said, military or emergency services, where at some point there's going to be bad decisions or bad decisions we have to take and make the less bad out of it, and making sure we document it so that we can justify it in the future, because hey, you made a bad decision on that day. Yeah, there was only bad calls. I made the less bad when it comes to this. And usually those decisions are liabilities for the future, because at the moment they happen, well, it's bad, it doesn't feel good, but we did the most we could. But of course, when everything is over, somebody's going to come and look at everything and say, hey, that was so bad of a decision. Yeah, but remember the context. Well, what context? So that's why we need to take the time to document as we go, which is super easy to say. Documenting, regrouping, making sure that if something has been said, we go and unsay it or correct it, especially on channels that are discoverable. I've seen this also. The example of, are we still on the record? Yeah, still recording. So that shit we got breached. It was like this. If it would have been unsaid or corrected by, yeah, it's less blah blah blah, and then let's see the report for what I meant. It's not that bad, and blah blah blah. So correcting yourselves. Apparently, I'm not a jurist, but or lawyer, but apparently in terms of court proceedings, if stuff that have been said, because we want to encourage communication, right? That's the other opposite, where if you put a gag order on people and they don't communicate, they don't collaborate because they can't communicate, we fail also. So encouraging communication, but making sure that everything that was said first, that people are responsible when they speak. So just don't go saying stupid stuff if you're not sure. And if you said something that later turned out to be false or needs to be corrected, let's go and correct it for the sake of discovery. But again, that discourse to you is very accessible. But for most managers and IT practitioners in the industry, it's kind of a new thing. So, oh yeah, I never thought of that. No, that's why we need that awareness. And speaking about BCP, IRP, and practicing, I guess.
I think we need maybe stop on this. Thank you for everyone who been till the end with us. So we now have like a 6 participants still left. I would suggest if you still have any questions, you can directly ask to JC. He's on LinkedIn, so we are accessible one hand now. It's very easy. So next session, I would probably will extend to 2 hours just in case to have a space for a more discussion to book the time.
It's
And
my fault.
maybe I will stop the record now. So thank you very much for this very interesting, very detailed and comprehensive presentation. Thank you, GC.
Thank you, everyone. And again, those one-on-one conversations, super happy to continue because we covered probably 10% of what could have been covered. It was fast and furious and raw. So I've seen stuff in the chats like the playbooks and everything. So much to say about this. Super happy to continue those conversations on one-on-ones or multiple on-ones like this. And again, it's not about money or services. It's about sharing through GCBR. I wish for this. So please, and learning from all of you because I'm just one person and we learn by collaboration. So thank you for attending, folks.
Thank you. Thank you. I wish you
very
all
much.
a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You be
Bye.
safe. Thank you all. Thank you, Manuel, Sarah, Marina, Don.